Looking for Eileen involved the pleasure of reading Orwell on how power works. Finding her held the possibility of revealing how it works on women. How a woman can be buried first by domesticity and then by history. But Orwell's work is precious to me. I didn't want to take it or him down in any way. I worried he might risk being cancelled by the story I'm telling.
That is the voice of Anna Funder, the Australian author of Wifedom, Mrs. Orwell's Invisible Life. It's a genre-bending piece of literature, part fiction, part non-fiction, part memoir, tracing the life of Eileen O'Shaughnessy, the wife of British writer George Orwell, and the often overlooked role she played in his career. Anna, thank you so much for joining us. Welcome to France 24.
Such a delight. Thank you, Dheepthi.
Now, your book, Wifedom, has featured in best book lists by The Times, The Economist, the New York Times, The Guardian, just to name a few. You're here right now in France to promote the French edition of your book. You speak French. Did you have a hand in the French translation of your book?
The French translation is absolutely exquisite. It's by a wonderful translator called Karine Chichereau. There were some things where we worked together because Eileen O'Shaughnessy, who I'm writing about, was herself a wonderful writer and a deeply witty, funny woman who could see through people. But a lot of what she wrote was in this very kind of Anglo-Saxon way. It was things are said between the lines, you know? So the first letter she writes to her best friend after they get married, she marries Orwell, she writes to her friend, I would have written to you earlier, but we have quarrelled so continuously that I thought I'd write one letter to everyone once the separation or murder was accomplished. So for Karine Chichereau, the translator, there's this issue of rendering Eileen's humour, although there's something serious behind what she's saying, and also my humour, I think, although there's something serious behind what I'm saying. She did a marvellous job. We worked together on a lot of particular kind of instances, which for me, I learned a lot. It was lovely. One thing that was untranslatable was the English title, which is wifedom.
Yeah.
A word that I thought that I'd made up, so it's completely my fault. But it has in English a sense of the domain of being a wife.
As a chore, almost.
Well, there are two things. Dom is a suffix from the German, which is the suffix in kingdom. So a realm, like the private realm, a man's kingdom, where a woman lives. It's also the suffix in serfdom, so the condition of being necessarily working for someone else by virtue of your status. So we have the French, which is a beautiful title to L'invisible Madame Orwell. So c'est bon.
Now, you are a fan of George Orwell, yet your focus was on his wife, Eileen O'Shaughnessy. Why was she such captivating subject matter?
Well, as I say, she was this brilliant woman who read English at Oxford. One of her tutors was Tolkien, who wrote The Hobbit. She had a fantastic sense of whimsy and fable. And the facts of her life have been almost completely omitted from the 6 major biographies of George Orwell. So I was fascinated to go and find her in history, to find what she had done for Orwell. She went to the Spanish Civil War with him. He writes a beautiful book about that, Homage to Catalonia, in which you can read without realising that she was in Spain the whole time. She had a political job at the head office of the political party while he was off in the trenches. She saved his life probably twice, and yet she doesn't appear in his book, and she doesn't appear in the biographies. So my passion, really, I fell in love with her. It was a total coup de foudre. But my passion was to resurrect her and also to look at how it is that a woman can be omitted, such an important woman who had the idea for Animal Farm as a novel, who wrote that with him as the bombs fell on London during the war, who was so deeply charming and hardworking, and who was reduced during the marriage to something that she had not been at the start of that marriage. So to look at a marriage of 80 years ago was also an interrogation of women's work today. You know, there's something about the work of women which is unpaid, indispensable, and yet somehow invisible in every single society in the world. And I wanted to look at the methods by which our work for our families and societies in the home and in every way is erased. So there are 3 strands to the book. It's doing all of those things.
Now, what's astonishing about this book, as well as the subject matter, is the construction. You know, this idea to do a chapter where you kind of reconstruct Eileen O'Shaughnessy and George Orwell's courtship and marriage. It's memoir where you explain your research process. Why did you opt for that format?
In all of my books, I'm looking at real stories, often real stories of courage among so-called ordinary people, stories that are not being told, that really reveal to us the nature of a human being, how people have this unbelievable moral courage quite often. And I want to tell the truth about something. I got permission to use 6 newly discovered letters of Eileen's to her best friend in the book, and they date from the beginning of the marriage to the end of the marriage. So I'm making a biography of a marriage, what happened behind closed doors. But to make Eileen live again, I had to do that in fiction, although I use her real words in her real letters. So there were these fictional elements that are designed to bring her as vividly to life as I imagined her. There's a kind of feminist examination of how and why patriarchy needs to leave women out, both what men owe to the women who made them, who brought them up, who taught them and helped them, and the women that are victims of men on the other side. So Orwell had many relationships with women which were sometimes more, sometimes less consensual. So to make the image of a man who's a genius and did everything alone, both of these categories of women had to be left out. And I want to discuss my own life because it felt more honest. You know, I'm a white woman of great privilege, married to a lovely human being. But still this story touched me so deeply. I thought, why does it resonate with me in my situation today? What is it about women's work that is being obliterated? You know, the UN estimates, this is a tiny figure that appears in an endnote in my book, but if the work of women that is unpaid supports societies across the planet, if it had to be paid for, it would cost 10.9 trillion US dollars every year. So we're looking at something that is indispensable but bizarrely invisible.
Now, this book also did receive some criticism, notably from the Orwell Society, whose patron is Richard Blair, who is Orwell's son. In their review, they critiqued the book, saying that by focusing on, I quote, George Orwell's maleficence, he becomes the main focus. What do you say to that criticism?
Well, I think the Orwell Society is a society of Orwell lovers, and the patron is the son who George Orwell and Eileen adopted in 1944. I had the great good fortune to start my work on this book by going to Spain with, his name is Blair, because that was Orwell's real name, and to travel around Barcelona with him. So it was really very, very special. The Orwell Society are committed to, they know that all of the things in my book are absolutely true, but it is quite hard to see history put from a woman's point of view. In the biographies of Orwell, all his mother and his aunt were suffragettes and left-wing activists, but that's left out. You know, what his wife did for him or what he did to other women is often put in footnotes or left out. Her important role in the Spanish Civil War is left out. So to put all of that together and to create a portrait of him and of the marriage from a woman's point of view is shocking to them because it upsets the myth of Orwell, this fiction of Orwell, which can only be constructed by leaving the women out.
Now, Anna, you worked as a human rights, constitutional law and treaty negotiation lawyer for the Australian government, no less. Was there a light bulb moment in your career where you said, okay, I need to switch to writing full time? This is the moment.
Do you know, I think it's something about your identity. Sometimes as a writer, you know it from very young. So I began my schooling in France, in Paris. And of course, I didn't understand a word. I was 6 years old. But I learnt French very quickly, as children do. And I think from that moment, I became completely fascinated by language. To me, language is a magic curtain, and things that can be expressed in one language are expressed differently in another. So I speak German as well. I'm absolutely besotted with languages and knew from the age of 6 that I was going to be a writer. I took a detour via human rights law, which was extraordinary and a wonderful experience, but I found myself with wonderful colleagues doing this fantastic work in human rights and environmental law and treaty negotiation, but I would be secretly taking notes. And in 1997, I left the law, I left my boyfriend, I left my country. I went to Berlin and I put myself in a situation I could only write myself out of. And that was my first book, Stasiland.
Now, here on the program, we ask guests, Anna, to give us their cultural pick, maybe something that has caught their eye. Can you tell us what yours is?
Recently, I've absolutely loved a film called American Fiction. It's from a book by an African-American writer called Percival Everett. And it's about an African-American writer who is a very good writer, but he's not having any success. So he writes a book in anger, which is where he employs all kinds of very stereotypical tropes of what it is to be an African-American in a language. It's kind of a bit gangster. But then he finds himself in the position where he has to come out in public and be that, you know, impersonation of a kind of gangster person. And because I have to impersonate myself in public now, presenting my book, it's something that rings true to me.
Wonderful. So you can see some parallels there. Thank you so much for joining us on set, Anna. Your book is available in French under the title L'invisible Madame Orwell. Thank you again for coming here on France 24. Thank you for watching. Stay with us. There's more news coming up.
It's gone too far.
Stag Arley is still on the run from authorities.
You haven't done anything. It's not like they can arrest you.
Wish I could go back to not selling books.
Is it bad to cater to people's tastes?
People want to love you, Monk. You should let them love all of you.
There's already so much buzz because of the movie deal.
Michael B. Jordan is circling.
We want to put him on the cover in one of those scarves, I guess you would call them, tied around his head.
A do-rag?
Do-rag, that's it. Do-rag and a tank top with the muscles showing.
Somebody call the fire department.